Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support and the recent content. We are on our last Northwestern team for our breakdown, so we have been moving through these in the Western Conference. And the funny thing is, we do have a comment from our last short about the Oklahoma City Thunder, and it's a long one, so buckle your seatbelt. And it was by the user Too Sweet. He said they did nothing to address the real need. They need they have no secondary scoring in the playoffs. They loaded up on SJ and no one else can score. This year they made improvements on defense and they still have no secondary scoring in the playoffs. They're going to run into trouble. Caruso is a good outside shooter, but not a great outside shooter. If you don't have any scoring to go up against anybody in the playoff series, regular season, they'll be there. They'll be great. Yeah, I mean, I agree with the majority of his points, but I'm kind of expecting, J Dub and Chet to take that leap. And that's exactly what we talked about in our Oklahoma City Thunder video, where, if those guys take the leap along with SJ playing at MVP levels, then, I think they should be considered the favorite in the Western Conference to, represent the West.
Yeah, because I think that's how you have to look at it is because it is a young team, most of the growth is going to come from within. And so, like you said, if guys like Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren, if those guys kind of, take what they learned from last postseason, right, where they kind of looked like, young guys that hadn't been in the postseason before, where they looked uncomfortable, right? They were kind of rattled by some of, what you would see in the playoffs in terms of intensity and physicality, right? If they can kind of learn and grow from that, right, then that's where they're going to be, like you said, either the favorites to win it in the Western Conference, or like you said, there shouldn't be a reason why they couldn't be because of the overall talent. Obviously, compared to some of the other teams in the West that are going to challenge as well, they don't have as much experience. But again, if those guys actually can kind of turn into, near all-star level players or, potentially even better, then that's what's going to be able to get them over the top. Because they do, like he said, need like a pretty reliable second guy. It's just in theory that should be Jalen Williams, and like you said, I'm hopeful and optimistic that he will continue to grow in his third season and get to that point. And if he does, along like I said with Chet, then they'll be there.
Yeah, exactly. And just a little reminder, if you guys do comment, we will pick and choose one randomly to read at the beginning of every episode, like we always do. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so now we're moving on through the Northwest Division. Utah Jazz. Yes, that team.
They're a
So
team.
yeah, so I mean, with the Utah Jazz, to be fair, even though it sounded like we were kind of making fun, they're a team that has had a lot of change over the last few years, right? Because
Mhm,
obviously they used to have Mitchell and Gobert. They would
mhm.
be, a perennial playoff team, even though they would go out early. And then they obviously made those big trades. They traded away Mitchell and Gobert, got back a lot for both of those guys. Gobert mainly with picks, and then obviously Mitchell, the combination of a couple of young players, but also Laurie Markkinen. So obviously, the last two seasons, the Jazz have kind of been a team that sort of tried to compete for a play-in playoff spot, and then they kind of at the end are like, "Oh, wait a second, maybe we shouldn't be this good," and then they end up having some type of injuries or whatever. But the main question that teams were going to have, or that Utah was going to have this offseason, this past offseason, was what were they going to do with Laurie Markkinen, because he had been in trade rumors. Obviously, a lot of teams really value his skill set as, kind of like a very, elite offensive forward, right? 7 foot forward, right? Who's got some ball handling skills. He can also shoot. He's a good athlete. He's a good rebounder, right? Last season, he averaged 23 points, 8 rebounds, a steal, 2 assists, 48 from the field, and 40 from three. So we know this guy offensively is, a super high level player. Um, but the thing was his contract was really inexpensive, right? He was only making like 18 million or so, because obviously this is coming that was coming off of his previous contract as a Cav, and so this offseason, after a ton of rumors and discussions about whether or not he'd be traded, right, where would he go, maybe Golden State, maybe somewhere else. But instead, it ended up being him staying, and we kind of were hinting at the idea of that he was probably going to stay a while ago, right? Because it just felt like there was just too much in terms of too much back and forth where it just felt like a deal probably wasn't going to get done, right? Golden State didn't seem like they wanted to move off of guys, but there was also some suggestions that Utah wasn't necessarily just going to give Markkinen up, which again, he's too good to just kind of give him up for nothing. But the thing is now he's basically got a max deal now. So he's making over 40 million a year, which is a lot of money for a guy like that. But, obviously if you're Utah, ideally, you might as well just keep him for now and then just kind of see where you go. Cause honestly, they're probably still not going to be that great anyways. I know a lot of people talked about, yeah, he'll win them some games, but I mean, they're not going to be like a super high win team this season because they just don't have enough talent. They do have, a lot of solid players on the roster. It's a weird mix of, you do have some veteran guys like Jordan Clarkson, John Collins, Colin Sexton, but then you also have a lot of younger guys like Walker Kessler. Then you also have Taylor Hendricks, right? Those are guys they drafted the last couple of seasons. And then obviously the new, well, as well as Keontae George, and then also some new rookies, right? So this offseason, in addition to re signing Lauri Markkinen, they drafted three guys basically, right? It was Isaiah Collier, it was Kyle Filipowski, and also Cody Williams. Cody Williams was their top pick, right? So that's kind of the main guy to focus on. That's Jalen Williams' brother. And he's got, some skill sets where, he's a good athlete, right? He's not quite as physical as Jalen Williams, but he does have a lot of, good offensive skill. Should have some good two-way potential. He's only 19. He's going to be 20, I think, by the time the season starts. I think it's in November. So, he showed some pretty good signs in the summer league and, in preseason so far. So I do think he could be a guy down the line that should be pretty good. I mean, he was drafted 10th overall. And then obviously you look at Isaiah Collier, that was the guy that shockingly fell all the way up, basically down to the bottom of the first round when he was kind of projected to be maybe at worst at worst or at best, maybe like a late lottery pick or like an early, like, a middle of the first round type of pick. And so, for him, right, the hope is that since he was highly regarded going into USC, right, maybe there should still be some good stuff there. Like maybe there's a good player still in there somewhere, right? He should be a good scorer. The shooting, we'll see. I mean, USC was kind of messy last season, and with their college experience because they had a lot of stuff going on, obviously, including Bronny unfortunately having to be out with the heart stuff. But either way, well, the year before, but either way, the thing is that, I do think that there's some, I think that it's a good sneaky, let's see if we can, make something out of this guy who was supposed to be really good but fell in the draft. So I like both of those picks. And then they also took Kyle Filipowski, right? Big man out of Duke, if I'm not mistaken,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and that's another guy that's kind of supposed to be like a, all around versatile big, right? Where he can kind of space the floor. He can get you some rebounds. We'll see what he does defensively. So, I mean, he's also got some other funny stuff going on that I'm not, that has allegedly, been discussed. But
Yeah,
either way,
allegedly.
not anything bad with him, but
No.
just in general.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we'll see. But either way, I like all the picks that they made in this year's draft because it's just again like none of them are picks where I feel like that was just a terrible pick, right? I think all of these guys certainly have the potential to be, really productive players. I think Williams probably has the highest ceiling, but I think the other guys should be able to, contribute at different points over the course of the season. It's just a matter of where all the minutes gonna, come from because of the fact of, as I already mentioned, Utah's roster has a mix of, younger guys that were already there that in theory should probably get some minutes. And then they also still have some other veteran guys on the roster as well, including some new ones they brought in, right? Such as Patty Mills, as well as Shvi Mikhailuk, and then also Drew Eubanks, right? Suns legend of a center who was so good that the Suns ended up, losing a draft pick so they could tamper to sign him. But with this roster, I guess the main question is first off, what is the starting five? Because it does seem like, based off of what they've done in the preseason, that some of what they did last year, they're not doing as much. Like, say, John Collins was starting for Utah for much of last season, kind of at the five spot, and then Kessler was like the backup big. Now Kessler's back in the starting five, and now Collins is a backup. And then you still have Sexton and George playing together. Then you have Markkinen and then Taylor Hendricks and Walker Kessler. So that seems like that's the starting five for now. I know Keontae George just got recently hurt in this preseason game going on as we record, so we'll see if it's not a serious injury or anything. Hopefully it's not. But after that, obviously, you still have Jordan Clarkson, right? Six man extraordinaire, right? Then you got, basically all these other guys like, the guys they drafted, Collier, Filipowski, and Williams, right? You got Bryce Sensabaugh, who they drafted the year before. And as I already mentioned, some of the other guys like Ju Zhang and then, um, the two-way guys. But I don't know. Like, the main thing is with the roster is that I don't expect them to be really. I mean, the last two seasons were kind of surprising in terms of how good they started the season off, especially 2 seasons ago when they were like the top seed in the West for a little bit. Last year, I think they were a little bit worse than I think some people may have anticipated, just because of the fact that I think the expectation was they were going to be able to do some similar stuff. I think people forget that Mike Conley was on the roster at the beginning of that season 2 seasons ago, so he was kind of able to organize some stuff. Whereas now you got some guards that are a little bit different, but now they know, I think, a little bit more about what they have. But either way, I think this time around, I wouldn't expect them to really be that good. And I also just kind of wonder what other guys on the roster could they possibly move by the trade deadline if they can, because some of them may be a little bit difficult. Because, like, say, John Collins just hasn't quite been as productive as you would like to see him, right? Maybe it might make more sense for another team, but that's an expensive ask, right? Because now, to be fair, Utah didn't have to give up anything worth of note to get him. I think, what was it, like Rudy Gay, and I think that was basically it. Maybe like a second. So they didn't give up anything to get him, but you're probably not going to get anything to get out of him, or to get out of that contract. So, and he makes 27 million. And then he has a player option for the same amount next season. So I do kind of wonder what Utah does with that, right? Clarkson, that's a veteran guy, probably better suited for, a six-man role on a contender, maybe. We'll see. And then after that, right, then you just kind of deal with the young guys. And then even like a Colin Sexton, like, he's his timeline, he's still relatively young. He's only 26. But you kind of, I think, would like to open up some room for some of these other guards to kind of get minutes. And so I just kind of feel like him being on this team is kind of pointless. But I just don't really know what is a realistic package that you could get back for some of those guys, because they're not like elite players, but I think they're solid. So, but it's just, the contracts, I feel like, might be a little bit much for some of them, like, just because Collins makes a decent amount of money. But either way, in terms of Utah's offseason, I would say B minus. Like I said, I like what they did in the draft. I like the marketing thing, even though it is a lot of money. But it's better to sign him and then see what you do with him later on, as opposed to just getting rid of him when he only makes 18 million, because you're not going to get much back. And now you could potentially be bad with him and then see if you could get a lottery pick next season, because I think their draft pick next season is protected. So there's not really any real reason for them to be good. So, I mean, at that point, you might as well just kind of continue to tank, continue to be bad, and then put yourself in a good position for next year's draft, since there's supposed to be a lot of up and comers in that draft, right? Like we've already mentioned, guys like Cooper Flag, Dylan Harper, other guys like that. So, for this Utah team, obviously a rebuild, it takes time. It can be difficult. But, I think they're on the right track in terms of, you have marketing, and then you just kind of need to hopefully draft another number one guy, and then just, kind of hope that these other young guys can develop. But like I said, it would just be nice if they could move on from at least some of those other guys. But either way, like, I think the offseason was fine, just because of the fact that, like, you kept marketing and you made some smart draft picks. So that's kind of the summary of it there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you talked about it pretty good. And the thing with Utah, I feel like they're one of the trickier teams to talk about because of the way that their roster is constructed. And I'll just put it like this, kind of like, to kind of put a bow on it. It's like, I love every young piece that's on that team already.
Hmm.
Like, even the guys that haven't even played any actual NBA minutes yet, I still love the thought process, and I like, the potential fit on paper. What I don't like is the veterans. I don't like the group of veterans on this team together as a whole. But they're there for a reason, and we all know what that reason is. It's most likely to rehab their value, increase it a little bit, to lose games as well. They're tank commanders, and that's the truth. Like, John Collins is a tank commander. Even like a guy like Walker Kessler, I know he's not like a vet, but I'm kind of low on him too. But having Markin in there is a huge plus because I think that kind of tells you that they might be a little bit further along in their rebuild than people think because look at all the young talent that they have on that team. Like you already hinted at it, like Colin Sexton is on the younger side. You have Keontae
Mhm.
George, the three picks this year, and it's really cool that um, all the picks that they got this year, top 5 players in their class in high school, coming out of high school or whatever. So the talent is there. It's just they've got to find a way to hone it and get it to fit all together because you have guys like Taylor Hendricks, Bryce Sensabaugh. Like it's a young team, like younger than people really think. And like I said, I think for a rebuilding team to win 31 games last season and to get arguably better, I think not to say they're a sleeper team, but I would say they're a sleeper in terms of how far along they actually are in their rebuild, I think. And they didn't really lose anybody like of note. Like I guess the worst loss that they took was what? Chris Dunn.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a positive. You didn't really lose anybody and you just gained a bunch of young talent. The problem is the entire Western Conference got so much better. And they didn't take a huge leap. They just acquired a lot of young talent, which I don't think is going to translate to a crap ton of wins, and that's not their goal anyway. But at the end of the day, I think they're positioning themselves to have a stockpile of young talent. Like I could see
Hmm.
them being kind of similar to Indiana, a few seasons from now with all the young talent that they have if they get, that other guy. Because I feel like Markkinen probably isn't good enough to be the number one option on a playoff team. That
Right.
might be just I don't know from what I've seen so
I think
far.
that's fair. I think
Yeah,
that's
so
definitely correct.
I think if he's a solid number two alongside a superstar number one, that's a good roster if the young
Yeah.
guys obviously pan out. So
And
I
that's why
like the
teams wanted
vision.
to trade for
Exactly. Yeah, like Markkinen could be the missing piece on a lot of other teams, just not the number one option. So I see the vision and I like it. So I give them a B for this offseason because, like I said, they didn't lose anybody. You got a bunch of young talent, and I think they're further along in their rebuild than people think.
Yeah, so and that's kind of the main thing is that like you said, I think the main goal for them is ultimately can they find that number one guy? Because ideally, if you could have both that guy plus Markkinen, then the other surrounding pieces, that could be like you said, a possible playoff team a few years down the line, right? Not this year, probably not next year either, but again, timeline wise, none of these guys are at an age where, oh shoot, 5 years from now they're either be on the decline or out of the league or something like
Right.
that. They're all, in their 20s basically. So,
And you
that's the
could
nice.
you could put them in a package. Like if you
Right.
really want to and go out and grab somebody or even trade for like, I don't know, a higher draft pick per se. Like, even if you're in that like top 4 range or something and you want to move up, you could probably put a couple of
Right.
those guys in there and then get that pick that you want. So,
Yeah, and reportedly Utah had been kind of chasing after guys in the trade market. Like they were rumored to be going after Mikal Bridges before he was traded to the Knicks.
right.
I think they were rumored possibly going after Brandon Ingram.
Right.
So I mean, so I think they've been active in a lot of these, and obviously they were kind of canvassing, I guess, the league for the market and stuff. So I think they've been active in a lot of these things. It's just again, it's just it's tough because you got to find a willing trade partner, and then presumably if you're trading for a star, that player probably has to have some level of say. How many of those guys want to play in Utah?
Yeah.
I don't
Tough
know,
market.
but yeah, exactly. So that's kind of and that's why for Utah, that's a team that has to mainly build through the draft.
Yes,
Obviously,
you have
market
to.
they didn't draft him; they traded for him. But a lot of these other guys like Keontae George, right, Cody Williams and Taylor Hendricks and others, right, those are all guys that they drafted.
Look at the
So
previous era too.
exactly, yeah. Mitchell, I think, was a draft day trade, and then I
Yeah.
think Gobert was a draft day trade. I think two,
Yeah.
if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. Both, I think, Denver, if
Yeah.
I'm not
Which
mistaken.
is
So
so odd.
yeah. So I mean, of the guys that let's say of the guys that they drafted last year,
Okay.
right? So that would be Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
as well as Bryce
Bryce
Sensabaugh.
Sensabaugh, yeah.
What are we looking for from them
Oh
in
man.
year two?
That's a good one. I feel like with Keontae George, you have to start with efficiency because I think
Hmm.
we know he can distribute the ball. We know that he can score at times, but we need them to be winning numbers. And right now, they're tanking numbers. Like the promise
Mhm.
is there for sure. And he's young, he's a freaking rookie. Um, but, going into the sophomore season, I think we do need to see some exponential growth, especially for the fact that, I thought he was going to be more of a two guard, but they seem to be playing him at the one, which is awesome. So, it seems like, that's the trajectory. And I think he has what it takes to be their franchise PG.
Mhm.
Taylor Hendricks, I don't know. I didn't really get to see a lot of him last year, if I'm
Right.
keeping it
Yeah, because
real.
he was buried in the rotation earlier in the year.
Yeah. So I want to see him out there. And that's kind of just simple as that. I want to see what he can do. I really don't know. I know he's, tall, lanky, he's got a good frame.
Yeah.
Kind of like the prototypical, two-way power forward wing, I guess. I don't know. But
Yeah.
you know, I really just want to see him crack the rotation and get some
Yeah.
minutes alongside like guys like Cody Williams. Like that would be so cool to see, rotations where they have a lot of length out there. More
Last year
so
in
than
40
what's
yeah.
up?
Last year in 40 games, 7 points, 4.5 rebounds, steal, and assist, a block, 45 from the field, 38 from 3.
I mean, those aren't horrible numbers. So I would say increase them a little bit. Um,
Mhm.
I think the efficiency sounded fine. So I
Mhm.
would maybe go up in volume. How about that? Let's say volume for him.
Right. Yeah.
Bryce
And then
Sensabaugh.
yeah.
That's an interesting one because I feel like
Right.
he's like a bucket getter, but
Mhm.
it could be fraudulent. I don't know. I don't know how to feel about Bryce Sensabaugh.
Right. Yeah, and to be fair, again, only 32 games, 18 minutes a game, and in those minutes, 7.5 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, but 39 from the field and
See,
29% from three. So
and
90
that's the
from the
tough
line.
part. Because
Yeah.
these are rookie numbers, so I kind of have to cut them some slack. But
On a
for him,
weird team.
right? So for him, I would feel like it's probably efficiency because I've seen what he can do. I know that
Mhm.
he can get buckets at times, but then you look at the efficiency and you're like, how much of this is kind of skewed? Who are you
Yeah.
playing? Yada yada
Right.
yada.
And
So
if you're
kind
a
of just similar
scorer,
to Taylor Hendricks, crack the
yeah.
rotation, efficiency.
And if you're a scorer, then that has to be the name of the game
Right.
because, it's not like, the other guys where he's probably going to, get you some rebounds, high level defense and whatnot. Like he is primarily an offensive guy.
And he's
So,
not a playmaker.
right. Yeah.
He's
So,
a scorer, like you said.
yeah. So at that point, like you said, that's where some of that, and that could also just continue to get more comfortable,
Yeah.
with the league and the way that it works and
Yeah, he's a rookie.
just kind of it exactly. And like he will have to improve the shooting, like the three-point shooting. Like you can't be below 30%, especially because like at the position he plays, I just don't know if I don't think he'll be an on-ball
What is he, a two guard
offensive
or a
wing.
four or a three?
I mean, Spot Track has him as a small forward. So I
Okay, so
mean, but
he's
I
a
feel
three.
like, if you look at what he did last season, I mean, he is like a 6'6" guy and 235. So I
Yeah.
feel like he's more like a wing,
Yeah.
like either a small wing or a big guard, but I
Yeah.
just don't really feel like he'll be like an on-ball scorer
Can't.
in the NBA. So
He
I just
can't.
feel like if that's the case, I mean, he would need to improve his three-point shot anyways, but especially if you're not going to be an on-ball guy. Like I
Yeah.
just feel like that's
100%.
going to have to be better just because of the fact that those are the type of opportunities you're going to get. Like I
Yeah.
don't think there's going to be as many possessions where they give him the ball and then ask him to, go one-on-one on guys, at the wing area or things like that. I mean, because that's more so Markkanen's job.
Because I feel like he's in a tough position because his position is saturated on this roster already. That's number one.
Right.
He's the 28th pick last year. You got Cody Williams coming in pretty much to
Yep.
take his spot, if I'm
Yeah,
keeping
because
it
he's the
real.
10th overall pick. He's going to play ahead of him.
So, and I think Cody Williams is already going to be better.
Yeah.
But if Bryce can turn into one of those depth pieces, like like I
Hmm.
said, similar to Indiana, I can kind of see the vision where they're going to have a bunch of young pieces that could potentially develop. Like if he turns into a Nebhard kind of guy, okay, that
Hmm.
then we're talking a different story. But as of right now, yeah, Cody Williams is going to take his job.
Yeah, because again, like the 10th pick of the draft, and
Yeah,
and like you said, he projects to be a better player anyways. That's why he
right,
was picked 10th, and
right.
that's why Bryce Sensabaugh was picked 28th. So I
There you go.
mean, I mean, also like the drafts are different too, but just in
Sure.
general, like I think most people are pretty high on Cody Williams, and I think we are too.
Yeah,
So,
very.
and that's kind of, and again, like that's what this is the roster where you kind of have to look at and evaluate a lot of these young players because that's most of the roster, right? Because like you even mentioned, like a Walker Kessler, where he was really good as a rookie last year, not quite as much. So maybe last year was just kind of just like a not a great year, where it's just like kind of a setback, right? Not necessarily indicative that he's just not going to be that good. And again, different roster, right? Because again, the first part of his rookie year, Mike Conley was there. Now you're
Mm-hmm.
guard, and that's something that I remember talking about when we talked about Utah's off season, where I mentioned like they're probably going to be worse than they were the year before because their guards, even though they are probably more talented guards, they're not quite this as natural of playmaking guards as a Mike Conley.
Sure.
And so then when you have a backcourt of Colin Sexton and Keontae George, right, that's how you're going to have a different situation for Kessler. But again, he's not a guy that creates his own offense anyways. Most of his values is rebounding, defense, and shot blocking. So can
Yeah.
he continue to do that? But he's still going to have to probably improve as an offensive guy anyways,
Yeah.
because otherwise, that's going to be a little bit more tough. But the good news for him is you do have a lot of, you do have some offensive oriented guys. And if that's the starting five that they go with, it's probably going to be better for him anyways because it'll be more spaced out. Because say
100%.
like a Taylor Hendricks should probably be. I mean, Collins shot well from three in Atlanta, but then he had like the weird wrist thing, and he just hasn't shot the ball the same sense. But Hendricks, he shot the three ball well last year. So if that continues with Markkinen, and then George, I mean, then after that, like Sexton and Kessler, I guess, would be your quote unquote worst 3-point shooters, and
Yeah.
Sexton's not a bad 3-point shooter. So, I mean, that should
Yeah, I'd
help
be
out.
okay with that.
Yeah, so that should help out Kessler a lot. But again, you're not looking at him to score. So, but yeah, that's kind of the cool thing about this roster is just all the pieces on there. So, we'll see, what happens with Utah. But like I said, I expect them to, once again, probably not be a playoff team or really a play-in team just because of the fact that I don't think that's where they even really want to be. They could kind of surprise some people and win some games early in the season, but it wouldn't surprise me if, like how it's been the last couple of years, where eventually they kind of fall back and then, kind of just go back to what you expect. Vegas has them at 29.5 for their over under. So, I mean, I think
That's
last year I want to say they
they went
won.
31-51.
Yeah, they went 31, and yeah, all right. So in other words, 2 games worse.
I'm gonna go under.
Yeah, I think that sounds about
Just
right.
because the
So
West got better. Like I said, I don't think they got like significantly worse. Where I'm gonna say they're dog crap, but like in that conference, I don't see them
yeah,
pulling out a whole lot of wins.
right. Like they're not like I don't know if they got. I don't think they got worse. I think it's just more so that like you said, the rest of the league improved. So
Yeah,
it's gonna look like that they're a really horrible team
yeah,
because relative to the rest of the West, they're not that great.
yeah,
So that's what I look at. And then, because in theory, you would hope that the young guys from last year improve, and then the young guys that come in should be productive. But that's probably not going to be enough to get you, past like 30 plus, to get you 30 plus wins. I mean, of course, Markkinen, if he's healthy, that could probably net you some extra wins here and there. But, I just don't think that that's kind of their goal. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but I just feel like the most likely scenario is they probably are not really any different than last year. Like in terms of the win losses, like I said, probably a little bit worse, but maybe they might quote unquote look better. Maybe I mean I don't know like that. Because of all the young players, they may just look more chaotic, so maybe they'll look worse. But the other difference is that I'm thinking that they'll make a move with one of these guys, and then that will kind of just remove a talent guy on the roster, and then that will open up some more minutes for the young guys, and then that'll probably kind of end whatever run they're looking to make.
yeah. I'm kind of projecting them to probably finish last in the West,
Really?
and they should be projecting themselves to do that as
Yeah,
well.
I
If
mean,
if
like,
that's the game plan, do it.
because I mean, really, I mean, you look at the Western Conference, and I mean, that's probably about right. I mean, because outside of, I mean, Portland's really the only other team that I think you could say might be worse, like might finish with a worse record
Yeah,
in the West
that's
than the
possible.
Jazz. I mean that's probably it. Just because of the fact that everyone else, of course, teams will say it, but most of the other teams in the West are looking to compete. So, the Jazz and the Blazers are kind of the only teams that I mean, the Spurs are in quote
Oh,
unquote rebuilding mode.
they're gonna be competing.
Yeah, but they're going to be better because they already have their number one guy, and he's in year two. He's going into year two.
The
Whereas the
training wheels
Jazz,
are off.
right? Whereas the Jazz, they have Markkinen, right? And he's already a very well established player. But like you said, he's probably not good enough to be the best player on like a playoff team.
Mm-mm.
And then the Blazers, we don't know if they have a guy yet. Like Scoot might be the guy, but so far he hasn't quite shown it yet consistently. So we know that they're definitely not going to be a
Yeah.
playoff team.
Right.
So
Right.
I think that's probably about right. It's probably going to be a race to the bottom between the Jazz and the Blazers. There'll probably be one other team that will probably be worse than expected because of injuries or whatever, or just because it's like, hey, remember that team that should be bad that we thought was going to be good? Yeah, they're going to be bad. So it's
Right.
probably going to be one of those teams.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'd say that's about right.
Yeah.
I mean, like, because what did they do last? Yeah, 31-51. So I don't know. I feel like winning more games than that. I mean, they had a lot of injuries to be fair, but I don't know. Like Markkinen only played in 55 games, but I just don't really see a reason for them to really be better. Like, not in terms of the roster itself, but just in terms of where their trajectory is. Because I think that their draft pick is protected. So I think they don't have an incentive to be good.
Right. Right.
So, let us know your thoughts in the comments about the Utah Jazz in regards to what you think they're going to be doing next season, your thoughts on marketing and, the rest of their young core guys, things like that. But now kind of moving on to the rest of the league. Preseason continuing to go underway. Again, not going to go over, literally everything, of course, because that would be too much. But, we did get some other guys, to kind of, and teams to see. Like we saw, for example, the Memphis Grizzlies, right? Ja played a little bit in the first half, got hurt, and didn't come back. Or I think he returned and played, but the guys, their starting guys, only played a limited amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right, Zach Edey, we got to look at him as the starting center for the Memphis Grizzlies, right? Made some cool plays out there on both ends of the floor. Tonight, as we're recording, right on Thursday, right, we had some preseason games. You had like the Pacers and the Cavs play, although some of the Cavs guys didn't play. The Lakers and the Bucks were playing, right, and those guys were playing in the first half. I don't know if they're playing in the second half. Well, I think Chris Haynes said that the Bucks guys aren't, but then I think Klay Thompson and Kyrie, they played for Dallas in the first half, I think, against the Jazz, right? So the Kings and the Warriors both played, right? So we got to look at some of those teams, and some of these teams will actually be covering soon since we're getting closer to that end of that other division. But in terms of like what you've seen over the last few days with preseason, what things kind of stand out to you?
Um, with the Spurs, I think there's a shift in energy from last
Hmm.
year. Bringing in guys like Chris Paul. Just kind of seeing Wemby kind of get the ball whenever he freaking wants, like he should. That's always nice. Stephon
Yeah.
Castle, he looked pretty solid.
Hmm.
So like I said, a change in the air over there. I think DeRozan's debut was pretty solid.
Yeah, for the
Um,
Kings.
yeah. The Knicks. How about those guys? I think Cat, he pretty much fits in there seamlessly.
Yeah.
That's a scary fit. So I think they're looking to potentially take the throne of Boston potentially, but that's been kind of interesting. Wizards suck. Uh, I'm trying to think of what else has been happening. The Warriors. I'm intrigued.
Hmm.
Are they actually going to be good? I know it's
No.
preseason, but yeah, I don't think they're going to be good. But
No, just
they
just ask Steph. I mean,
yeah,
he
you're right.
already answered that question on
Yeah,
media day.
you're right. But once again, the rookies they look solid. And I've been thoroughly impressed with how well they've looked, and nobody's really had like a stinky game. Like even Mataz Bucelis, like
Hmm.
that was a pretty solid game that he had, I think, for his debut.
Yeah, exactly. And like we kind of talked about before, you always got to take preseason with a grain of salt. But I think for the rookies, like we kind of mentioned, like a lot of these rookies have kind of come in, and obviously, like not that every single rookie has had like a stellar game, but a lot of these guys in their first few games have looked pretty solid. Where it's
Sar.
kind of like yeah, exactly. Where we've talked about with a lot of these guys, you know, this was supposed to be a draft where a lot of these guys were going to come in and provide some utility for a lot of these teams, right? And that's kind of the nice thing about if you weren't a lottery team, then you might have actually added like a guy who could potentially be a solid, bench piece or, borderline starting contributing
Yeah.
guy in the draft like for nothing. Whereas, obviously it's a little bit rough if you're towards the top of that draft
Yeah.
because, we don't know what we're going to expect from these guys. Like say even like an Alex Sarr, right? Like in his second game, he was better I think than in the first game, right? But we don't necessarily know what to expect, from him as a rookie. But also the Wizards are a different team where it's like they're in complete rebuild mode. So you shouldn't really overreact to whatever, his stats are, especially in preseason.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
You're
just
right.
in general, I think that's the cool thing about a lot of these rookies is that in theory, um, we don't expect a lot of these guys to be stars as rookies, but I think we should expect a number of these guys to be impactful players in their rotations. So a lot of these guys will be set up for success where they can kind of just come in and play a role, and then that should be able to help out a lot of these teams. So
Yeah.
good for a lot of these teams because a number of these guys have looked good in their preseason debuts. Just of course, just bear in mind it is preseason.
Yeah. What about the Suns? Are you sold on them?
Yeah,
Obviously,
I
it's
mean,
preseason, but they do look
yeah, I mean,
better. There is a different vibe.
right. Yeah, like they do, because I think the thing is that again, like with Jones, you got him as like an orchestrator, for the offense. And if their offense is better, in theory, that should help their defense. I'm still just not really sold that they're going to be able to have a championship level defense, and I think that's kind of the issue for them. But
Hmm.
I think at the very least, the offensive identity seems like that should be more effective than it was last year. Because last year they were an offensive team that in the playoffs couldn't score, right? Like a scorer that like a scorer that is supposed to score that can't score. Like that was their problem because we knew they weren't going to be great defensively last year, even though they were fine in the regular season. But we were more surprised at how bad their offense looked. And obviously, we'll get more into the Suns when we get to them and their rebuild. But again, we talked about their offseason where it was better than I think we would have expected given what they had to work with. I'm just still not really sold on their ability to win the championship, but I
Right.
do buy that they should be better than last season. But it's just the question is, could they actually be a top 3 seed? Maybe, but
Maybe. Yeah.
that might be a tall task just
Yeah.
because of all the good teams out in the West.
Yeah. You're right.
Then we also have some other news and rumors to talk about. These are always fun. So obviously Shams Charania, right? In his first, stretch, his first gig at ESPN or stint at ESPN, he kind of dropped some bombs, in the last few days or whatever. So he mentioned the Braun Bronny debut coming soon. They could play together as soon as opening night. That kind of caused a storm, on social media, from some people. We'll see how much it actually is. Like, I feel like it could just be a scenario where he just kind of comes in and then they play for like a few minutes and then he comes out.
Hmm.
I don't expect him to be an actual rotational guy, but not really what I was expecting. But to be fair, like it happened in preseason and it was just like completely unexpected, right? Where it was like I think in the middle of the second quarter, and he just kind of came in and then they played together. It was like, oh wow, they played together.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really know what to make of it. Like, I get it. It's awesome that
Right.
we get
Yeah.
to see him play with his son and all, but is it gonna help the squad? Like,
That's where I'm curious as to when it will happen on opening night. Like, is it just gonna happen like in the middle of like the first or second quarter? Is it gonna be like,
yeah.
if the game is over? Like, and that's where I don't really know. So
I mean, like, either way, it's gonna be historical, which is cool.
right, yeah,
But the way that
exactly.
they're
And that's
the way that they're teeing it up a little bit is kind of crazy. Like,
right, because
I
I
don't
didn't
want to
really
sound like a
expect them.
hater, but it's crazy.
Right,
Like,
because
I
I
feel like it's
didn't.
a bomb.
Right, because like I think like some of the like negative comment stuff is just kind of overhyped. Where I
Yeah.
just don't really look at him as like a rotational guy this year, which is fine. But, at the same time, I didn't really expect that. But, again, as long as it doesn't come at the cost of like losing games, I don't really
Right.
have
Right.
a
Right.
issue with it. I'm just kind of curious as to like when it will happen in the game because that's where I think that could be interesting. But again, we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, like, honestly, I know this is probably gonna sound like some some hating, but for me, it's either garbage time, you're up
Mhm.
by a lot, or he doesn't
Right.
play at all. And I'm keeping it
Right.
real.
No, I
I
mean, I
would
agree.
I wouldn't risk that. Especially minutes over some other guys on that team. Like I feel like Connect has kind of shown that he belongs on that team. So I think he should be getting the bulk of the rookie minutes.
Yeah, so we'll see. Yeah, and obviously we'll get into the Lakers roster when we
My
get into
God,
their
we
off.
haven't even done them yet.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah, so stay tuned for
We
that.
should save them
But
for last.
yeah, we might.
That's funny.
So yeah, and then more Shams bangers, another Laker thing. Lakers looking for center. Who could have thought? Who could have expected
Dirt.
that? LA exploring big trade for a big amid Jared Vanderbilt Christian Wood injury. So again, they knew that Jared Vanderbilt was injured, right? Christian Wood, obviously that one kind of came by. I mean, he was already hurt, but then I guess he had a setback with his knee or whatever. So you didn't do anything in the offseason about it because I'm sure they knew we didn't know about the Vanderbilt thing, but I'm sure they knew about it. Then they didn't address it in the offseason. Then they brought in Christian Coloco on a two-way, right? Who, obviously had been recent, who had just kind of come back from blood clots. He's still not cleared to play. Again, that's not really that much of a shocker to me. And now you still don't really have a center other than Jackson Hayes and AD. So I don't really know what was going on there. I don't know what they're cooking up there in the front office in organization, but that one's kind of a no-brainer to me. I just don't really know what the move is because I mean we hadn't even talked about it yet, but it happened over the course of the week. But like Wendell Carter Jr., that's another big man off the books or off the trade block, for a lot of these other teams because he
Hmm.
just signed a 3-4 year extension or whatever, and so that means he's not getting traded this year. And that's wild that Orlando re-signed all three of their big men and gave them all long-term deals.
Yeah, it's
So
dope.
yeah, so I mean they're set, at that center spot. They could either move one of them, then keep others, or move
Smart.
all of them, or keep two of them. Who knows? But yeah, I mean we've been talking about that since last year in
Yeah.
terms of the big.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. At this point, what more do people want? I think like the whole entire Lakers fan base, from what I've been seeing, has been asking, pleading, and begging for a big man
Right?
for like the
You're right.
past year or two, and
Yeah,
they still haven't got it. Like the Miami
right.
Heat got their big man before the freaking Los Angeles
Yeah,
Lakers. Who would have
and
thought?
that was the guy that I had mocked going there, and then he went like what one pick before
Yeah,
when
like
nobody expected him to even go that high.
yeah, like who would have thought? Like I don't know. I'm in utter disbelief with the
Hmm.
Lakers, but I'm also
Hmm.
not surprised. Um,
Right.
I don't
Again, we
think
can
there's a good solution here. There's not a good
right.
solution.
And
Not
that's
at
the
this
issue
point.
is that there's not an obvious move because we're already so late into the off season, and then that a bunch of guys are just gone, and so some guys you're just gonna have to wait until they're eligible to be traded. Like let's say they want a Valanciunas, like you're just gonna have to wait because you legally cannot trade for him at this point.
Yep.
And like, is that even like the right move? Who knows?
Getting him in
Um,
free agency would have been the right move.
right, but the Wizards decided to snatch him up. Yeah.
That is so
Yeah,
funny,
I mean,
man.
they gave him an extra year, so it's like
Yeah.
it's more money, longer term. I mean, I think the Lakers offered him more money, but for 1 year, I think either 1 or 2 years,
Yeah.
whereas the Wizards gave him quote unquote less money per year, but not by that much, but
That's
3 years. So
security
it's
though.
like,
That's
yeah, so that's
yeah.
security, so that makes more sense.
Mhm.
Um, more Shams bangers. This one honestly almost made me flip out of my seat, like because I did not see this one coming. 6'7" All NBA defender likely going to serve as Pelicans starting center. If you didn't know, my friend, that is Herb Jones. So that might be the Pelicans starting center. I did not see that one coming at all.
Yeah, that's a bombshell. That was one where it's like, did I just get sent-held? Like, this can't be real, you know?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
I
Yeah. For those of you who don't know NBA Central on Twitter, that's
yeah.
the fake version of NBA Central, and they've caught some people many
Y-
times, including NBA players and
Yeah.
media.
Yeah, and
So
it's they've been on national TV before, but yeah,
mhm.
my goodness. Dumpster fire question mark cuz that's ridiculous. I would prefer to just start Zion at the 5. I know granted he's not the greatest defender, but
Right.
I mean, Herb Jones, I don't know about
He's
that.
an all NBA defender, but I just don't know if I want him as my center. I know that sometimes
In the paint?
they I know sometimes they've kind of experimented with him as like a small ball 4, 5 in some of these lineups because
Yeah.
like because they've had lineups where they'll have like Zion with a bunch of, 3 and D guys,
Yeah, they
just so
tested
that
out what it would look like without Brandon Ingram.
yeah, but like I don't know, like it's different. It's
At the
interesting.
5?
I'm just very curious to see how that would work against, some teams. But Sham said, quote unquote, he's going to be a hybrid player. He's gonna play the 4, maybe some 5. I'm told Herb Jones is essentially going to serve as the starting center.
I mean, I don't
So,
have a problem with him at the 4. Like you said, we've seen him do it. He can do
oh, he
that.
said start. Yeah. So that could be like offensively he's the 4, but defensively he's the 5. So
Where's
there
the
you
rim
go.
protection coming from, though? Because I don't think he's a great rim protector. Last time I checked.
I mean, I don't think they didn't really have much rim protection last year either. It's just they
Oh,
were
well, that
bigger.
explains it.
But
Great.
yeah, but they were bigger though because you had Valanciunas at the 5 and Zion
Sure.
at the 4, and then I guess Ingram slash Murphy and then Herb Jones and
Sure.
CJ. So I don't know. Like we already talked about, like it would be nice if they had like an actual starting caliber center. I mean, they do have some backup bigs. Like you got Misi. We'll see if he's actually ready, or just like if he's a foul merchant, but in a bad way, like in terms of just racking up fouls. And
Right.
then Daniel Tice, again, they experimented with him, I think, in the first game, and he's 6'8", so he's kind of an undersized 5, but I don't know. He's an awesome defensive player.
Yeah.
It's just I worry about him being able to, hold down the
He's
line
not a
for that
starter.
because like now you got Murray and McCollum and Zion. None of those guys have played great defense the last few seasons, and then Ingram if he's healthy. So it's like I don't know. I don't really
So,
like that at all, but.
so
Yeah.
it. This is weird because when Trey Murphy comes back, he's coming off the bench.
Yeah. I mean, as long
Jeez.
as Ingram is on the team, like I think he's just gonna be a 6 man.
Yuck. That's all I have to say is yuck.
Yeah. And like I said, with the back to the Lakers thing, yeah, Sham said the Lakers are still waiting for answers from the league on the status of Christian Coloco. So great job, guys.
That yeah, that's how you know it's bad when you're freaking. I'm not even gonna say anything. Let's continue.
Yeah, yeah. Last but not least, the NBA GM survey came out the other day. So obviously we always talk about it every year. I mean, we haven't done this for long, but like, of course, the survey comes out every year and they always ask like a lot of interesting questions like, who's going to win the finals, who's the best player, who's going to win MVP. If you were a starting franchise, it can sign, any player, who would it be? So we're not going to obviously go through all of them, just kind of go through some big ones just to kind of see, what the GMs were thinking. They don't have to answer all the questions and they can't and they can't vote for their own team or personnel. So the percentages are based off of like how many actually answered as opposed to all 30. So which team will win the NBA finals? 83% said the Boston Celtics. So that basically means that, at least the GMs that answered, I don't know how many answered, but basically that means that they think they're the overwhelming favorites to win the title. So
Um,
I think that's kind of the key takeaway there, I think, for that one. Just because last year the Celtics and the Nuggets were both tied at 33%. But now it's just overwhelmingly Boston, then Oklahoma City at 13%, then third the Dallas Mavericks at 3. So that's a lot different from last year.
yeah, that's kind of interesting. I can't hate on it, and I might have to spoil one of my freaking like predictions or whatever, but I think the Knicks are gonna be the team coming out of the East.
Yeah,
So
and just to kind of compare it last year, yeah, the Celtics and Nuggets were both tied for the 1, then the Bucks, then the Suns, and then the Clippers.
okay,
So, and then the year before was the Bucks at 43. So, like I said, it's very different from what it was last year and the year before. Who will win MVP? They got SGA at 40%, so he's the favorite there. not really much of a surprise because I think most people are very high on Oklahoma City and they expect them to win a lot of regular season games too. And that's kind of one of the, best ways to win MVP is to win a ton of games and also put up a bunch of great stats.
Yeah,
Um,
that
and
makes sense.
then, yeah, and then if you were starting a franchise today and could sign anybody, who would it be? 77% said Wemby. Last year it was Jokic, and he was at 33%. And now he and SGA are tied for second, and then Luca's fourth.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. I mean, Wemby did stuff in his rookie season that we've never seen. It was arguably the
Yeah.
greatest rookie season that we've ever seen.
Yeah. Which player forces opposing coaches to make the most adjustments? Luca at 33%, then Steph, and then Jokic. Last year was Steph at 40%, but now it feels like Luca's kind of, taking the mantle there.
That makes sense. Look at last season. They picked apart pretty much every team except for Boston. So
Yeah.
that makes
And then
sense, and it all starts with
and
Luca.
then and then this one is really interesting where, who's the best at different positions. And three out of the five are very different from last year. So point guard is Luca. They have him at 37%. Last year was Steph at 63%, and now he's dropped to third, behind SGA. And then who's the best shooting guard? Last year was Booker at 63%. Now it's Anthony Edwards at
I knew
33,
it. I knew
then
it.
Devin Booker at 23, then for whatever reason SGA at 20. I don't know why he's at both guard spots. I mean, I know he is a combo guard, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, put him in one or the other for that one. Small forward, Jason Tatum, the exact same percentage, 47% last year, 47% this year. And then after him, it's a three-way tie between Luca, who's also at point guard, and then Kevin Durant and LeBron.
I
And
mean,
then,
it's pretty accurate though.
yeah, then for power forward, it's still the same. It's Giannis. The difference is that it's not at 97%, it's at 77%. Then it's Kevin Durant at 7%. And then after that, it's just a bunch of other guys that like also
Okay.
are at the four. And then it's Jokic at the center spot, down from last year a little bit, but still overwhelmingly number one.
I mean, all those guys are versatile. I'm not ready to crown Ant Man the best two guard in the league yet. I think he can do that. I think it's still
Yeah.
Book.
Yeah, he needs a little bit more. I think he needs to do a little bit more than just
Yeah.
last year. Like it needs to be more not well, I guess yeah, consistent. Like it needs to be repeatable and sustainable, right? Because again, what if this season then they just go out? I'm not saying they will, but like what? Let's say like this year they go out in the first round again,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's like okay, well that might knock you down a little bit.
Yeah. Exactly. So I'm a
And
little bit
again,
higher on Book than Ant, but that's
And
just me.
again, to be fair, a lot of this is gonna be recency bias because of
Yeah.
like what we saw, well, what everybody saw last season at different points. So there's gonna be a lots of changes from year to year, right? Like say Boston and Denver were tied, and now like nobody believes in Denver, at least amongst the GMs.
Yeah.
Then which team made the best overall moves? Oklahoma City. I think that's the only team we've given an A+ this offseason for, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Paul George considered the biggest impact acquisition. Caruso, most underrated. And then
Paul
what?
George.
Yeah, he's considered the which one player acquisition will make the biggest impact. Because you got to look at
Who are the
like,
other options though?
well, Bridges, Towns,
Oh, it's
Caruso,
Towns. It's
DeRozan.
it's 100% Towns.
Do you disagree with them?
100%. Towns opens up the offense. That's going to be
I
a
think the thing
completely
is
different
that with
team.
Philly, I think the thing is that with Philly, like they did a lot of different things. So it's like the whole team has kind of been changed. So it's not just like obviously like Paul George is the key acquisition, but they brought in a lot of guys. Whereas like with some of these other ones, like say OKC, it was just two guys. Obviously they're key guys, right? But they're not, it's not like they completely reshaped their roster, right? Relative to, what Philly did. So I think that's kind of like where like with you where I'm kind of with you where it's like I wouldn't put Paul George at 60%, but I
He's not
understand
number
like
1 for me, bro. He can't be.
yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is I can understand it. I just don't know if it's like overwhelming because I think like with Philly we talked about it where Maxi's got to take the leap. Like that's kind of the swing piece
Yes.
I think for Philly more so than Paul George,
Yeah.
just because of his age. Whereas if Maxi can actually kind of progress and take that next step, that's where I'm going to be much more frightened about Philly possibly Whereas
Right.
if it's kind of just you're just adding Paul George and other guys, like they'll still be really good, but you know. Then after that, Towns' most surprising move, yeah, it surprised all of us, 100%. Rookie of the year, Reed Shepard. And then, that one
Solid.
is kind of hard to guess anyways, because I think this draft class, like, there's a lot of solid players, but you're just kind of wondering, like, which one is actually going to have the best rookie season. Like, what would constitute rookie of the year stats, for this draft class? I'm not sure. So, I mean, I could see, like, Reed Shepard being a solid pick. I'm just curious as to, like, what's his minutes distribution. I mean, in theory, he should play a lot, but they also have a crap ton of young players on that team. And but I guess since he's like the third pick, he might have seniority over some of the other guys that were playing last season just because they were there. But he's, the number 3 pick. But I don't know.
Yeah, I'm gonna respectfully disagree with it. I think it's a good pick, but
Right.
I'm gonna lean into my Wizards bias and pick Sar, um, just because of where the heck he is on Earth.
Yeah,
It's the
they didn't
Wizards.
have him.
He's gonna have. I know.
Yeah,
Granted, the summer league is not a good start. The preseason
right.
he's looked better, but if he
Hmm.
can average like 12, 7, and like a block
Hmm.
or a block and a half, I think that's rookie of the year
Yeah.
numbers for
I
this
guess I guess they're
draft
just
class.
kind of wondering, like, who's going to allow him to put up really good stats because it's like, you gotta kind of factor in like the point guards of the roster.
You're
So
right.
it's like, yeah, and I guess that's kind of what they're thinking. But who knows? I mean, like, if he can kind of create some offense, I mean, maybe he doesn't need a point
I
guard, but
mean, like if
probably
you
not.
watched him through preseason, like the Jordan Poole connection doesn't seem too bad. Granted, we did
Right.
just have like 20 something turnovers. I think it was like 26 or 29
Mhm.
yesterday or something like that. But
I mean, again, like they're not trying to win games, so it's like
no,
what they're doing is like, I guess, fine. But like, I think he'll be better probably than some people. Like I don't think he's like as horrible as what we saw in the summer league. I
he
just
looked better
because
at the
like with the
4 than the
summer league,
5.
yeah, like because and also like when you're a big in the summer league, we've talked about it. Like again, look at the guards you're playing with. Like we saw Wemby in the summer league, and guys literally were licking him off.
Yeah,
Bet
it's
you that's
bad.
not going to happen this season.
Heck no.
Yeah, so and yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna say Reed Shepard's gonna win Rookie of the Year. I mean, it's just like, what's his usage gonna be? I mean, what are his numbers gonna be? I feel like there might be some options that may be a little bit better just because of the teams they're on.
Hmm.
Because like, because those guys may just,
Could be
not that they'll
raw.
like, yeah, like I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard to say. Like, because even like with a Dillingham, is he gonna play 30 minutes a night for Minnesota? Like, probably
No,
not.
no.
Just yeah. So it's like I don't know. That one's kind of tough. And
Yeah.
then which rookie will be the best player in 5 years? Still Reed Shepard. Oh, alrighty. So
Wow, the Reed Shepard
at,
glaze is crazy.
at 43%.
I guess they're just going off of summer league and preseason, huh?
Yeah. Best defender, Wemby. Best perimeter defender, Drew Holiday. I mean, again, like a lot of this, some of this stuff is relatively unchanged. Like most of the coach stuff is exactly the same. Like Spoelstra still considered the best coach. There are some coaches that have moved up a few notches, like Missoula, which I think, we both talked about. Like, yeah, he's improved as a coach. um, and things like that. Which team is the most fun to watch? Now it's the Pacers. Last year was the Nuggets. So I think that's kind of the main thing that we're seeing is that like there's just like I guess no belief amongst GMs about like the Denver Nuggets like whatsoever. Like and it's just kind of wild how we went from them looking like prohibitive favorites to now everybody's basically just like nope they're done. We're counting them out.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So, and obviously, again, we've talked about this before, and this is always kind of like a fun thing to just read, just because of the fact that it's always kind of cool to see, what the people who actually put the rosters together think of the players around the league, because sometimes it's kind of eye opening, both in good ways and also bad ways.
Yeah, it's always fun. It's somewhat of a tradition here.
Yeah, and again, if you guys want to, or anybody wants to see it, you can go on NBA.com and then they have the survey and they have every single one since 2002. So if you even want to go back to see what they thought, of guys in the league like 20 years ago, you can look at that.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Hmm.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments about the Utah Jazz, their offseason, what your expectations are for them going in, as well as their young guys. What do you guys think about all this these other news and rumors going around the NBA? What do you think of the GM survey? Do you agree with some of what we kind of talked about in the survey? Do you disagree with some of it? Just let us know. And again, the NBA season's coming up. We're only a couple weeks away. So obviously, we're going to be able to continue to make content, and hopefully, we're going to be in for a really awesome NBA season. That's going to be kicking off, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We're out.